All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the CX Chronicles Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, guys. Mark Slatin is joining the show. And Mark is an awesome customer-focused business leader who's had a bunch of different interesting leadership positions in the customer experience, customer success space. And we're super pumped to have him. So Mark, why don't you start off the show? Say hello to the CX Nation, my friend.
Hey, CX Nation. Thanks so much, Adrian, for having me on the show. I'm excited.
100%, man. So, guys, Mark's a couple things to call out before he sets the stage for us. Number one, his company, EmpoweredCX, is doing some really, really cool things inside of the customer experience space. And the other big thing, Mark, similar to myself, guys, has this awesome podcast, Delighted Customers Podcast. We actually just had the privilege of joining Mark a few days ago on the show, so we're excited for that. But Mark, why don't you start off the episode like we start off all these shows? Give the CX Nation a sense for how you got started in your personal customer-focused business leader journey. How'd you get into this space, and what were some of the stepping stones that you kind of took early on, and as you got into later into your career to get into the whole space to bring you to where you are today with EmpoweredCX?
Yeah, well, first, again, thanks so much for having me on the show. And I would say it started way back when I was in college. I went to the University of Maryland and got involved in this summer program from a company based in Nashville called the Southwestern Company, and sold books door to door all 3 summers while I was at college. First year was Amarillo, Texas, which is from a native New Yorker, just culture shock totally. And then Phoenix, which was very hot, no matter how you slice it. In the summer, and then Atlanta. So I just went into a career in sales and spent like 23 years for really just 2 different companies, Boise Cascade and Standard Register, in sales management and leadership, and then decided, I would love to try to do consulting and help other companies with revenue growth strategies and, corporate strategies that connected to the revenue growth. Did that for 6 years. And at the end of that, one of our clients, one of my prospects and one of my clients was a bank. And the CEO of that bank said, thank you for helping us as a consultant, but we'd like to bring an internal resource in to this thing that had just gotten named called customer experience. I know people had floated the name around before that, but the CXPA had just written its charter in 2011, and this was around 2012. And so I started with the bank, Sandy Spring Bank, in 2013, and stayed there 9 years. And I launched and led their CX work over that period of time. And then just a year ago, not quite a year ago, my wife and I moved from Maryland to Delaware, to the Delaware shore, and started EmpoweredCX, and the goal here is to empower, so give you the tools, the skills, and everything you would need as an organization to turn indifferent customers into loyal fans. And most of my because I worked in the bank and we had an insurance and wealth, and we were a bank, retail and commercial. It'll be in financial services, particularly in the mid-market.
That's awesome, Mark. So number one, thank you for sharing that story. I guess where my brain immediately goes is I love that you started your journey on the sales side, because if there's so many awesome CX and CS leaders who did get the privilege of being able to start on the sales side, because number one, they know how hard it is to create a buck out of thin air, right? Selling. I know a lot of our listeners probably have a lot of different opinions about their friends across the aisle on the sales side and the revenue side, but selling is super difficult. It's one of the hardest things that you can do in the world, I think, to be able to get an individual to understand what your product or what your service or what your offering is, and then to get them to be able to sign a contract and then fork over a stack of bucks to be able to pay for it. It's hard, man. But this is the thing I love about CX and CS leaders who were formerly in the sales side. Man, they understand people. They understand relationships. They understand having to build rapport and having to be able to typically be extremely good listeners to understand whether or not an individual is qualified or unqualified. And then more importantly, the expectation side, right? Like the best salespeople in the world, not only are they great at listening and great at hearing whether or not some of the major qualification items are in line, but then they're awesome at expectation setting, because the best salespeople in the world say no a ton, right? They literally are getting through 100 names and 100 different people to maybe get the one or the two people that are actually qualified, actually have the expectation alignment, and are actually ready to buy in a position. So I love that that's kind of how you started. It must have set you up really nicely. Before we move forward, I'd love to, so your experience with Sandy Spring Break, this is cool, man, because I think number one, you see so many big banks out there always talking about customer experience and talking about their customers. I gotta wonder, like in all the time that you spent with Sandy Spring, was the bulk of your time really kind of spent meeting and talking with customers, or was it really kind of spent with spending time internally with the employees who are doing the bulk of the customer communications and the customer activities?
Yeah, so let me come to that question, but I want to respond to something you said because it kind of left it out as I shared the what I did, but I didn't really share the why what I did, and it relates directly to what you shared, which is about how salespeople, number one, agreed 100% how difficult it is, a job it is. If you don't believe it, try it yourself if you haven't.
It's true, man. It's hard.
And number two is what I noticed as someone who was responsible for a sales organization in the DC metropolitan area is that the best salespeople that worked on my team were really good at building relationships, and so much so that they were the people that were invited to their customers' weddings. They were named godparents to their customers' children. So the relationships were real, and I noticed that, and that's what kind of led me to say, okay, on the other side of the fence, which is the customer's lens, what could we be doing better to serve the customer? And so in some cases, you have people like great sales reps who are doing heroics, who are making it happen, and people directly supporting those salespeople doing heroics. They tend to be like the triage between whatever's going on behind the fence and whatever the customer's seeing. But then how do you, and this may be a good segue into your question, how do you then turn people from doing heroics into making them heroes by just having a culture where CX is embedded? And that really is the difference. And there's obviously a lot that goes into that, but the issue is, how do you build those trusting relationships with customers and begin to design, your strategies starting with the customer in mind?
Yep, I think you are spot on, man. Which is like, if some folks are wondering why maybe in their organization or at past organizations that they've been a part of, why CX and CS doesn't work, or why it's constantly met with roadblocks, or it's constantly met with no's, or it's constantly difficult to get the right types of SMEs to buy into some of the stuff. You just nailed it, man. This is a top-down thing. If you're in a business where your executive leadership team isn't fully bought in and fully supportive of the fact that customer experience, customer success, customer development, constant learning and pivoting and really kind of constantly kind of being on the pulse of what your customers are saying, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get things done. It's going to be hard to push projects across the line. It's going to be hard to break silos down and build bridges across different team and departmental silos. And then the last thing is, it's a team sport, man. I know some people might think it's cliche, but like, your CX and your CS is only going to be as good as how an organization can get its team around the customer journey, around all the decisions and the calls to action that are going to be required to improve. And again, this is why it can be such an incredible way to transform your business, but this is also why you see a lot of CX and CS efforts maybe fizzle out. And so I think you're spot on, where relationships and then just having that top-down approach is really, really imperative to making sure that you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck on the CX and the CS side. Mark, I'd love to dive into the first CX pillar of team. I'd love to hear you kind of spend a couple of minutes talking about, so from all these different places that you've been a part of leading and coaching and pushing the future of CX forward, I'd love for you to spend a couple of minutes talking about team, man. What are some of the things that you've kind of picked up along your own journey that have worked really, really well for you? Or maybe what are some of the examples that you've seen within your own teams over the years, or that you're doing now with some of the clients you're working with Empowered CX? Spend a couple of minutes talking about team.
Yeah, so thanks. And yeah, I'm not sure I've actually fully answered your question, is where did I spend most of my time? So it was both customers and employees, and figuring out, what are the things we need to have in place, organization. And clearly team was one of them, right? So, having executive leadership is supporting is critical. And what I always say is, you're going to have a ceiling on your CX work unless you have, to the extent that you have leadership support or don't. right? So one of the first things I did is, as I'm sure other people have done, is done a listening tour around the organization with all the key stakeholders, and try and build a team that way, is just really trying to understand what each key stakeholders' objectives, goals, what mattered most to them. And then, you have to speak their language, language of the C-suite, but also language of other key stakeholders. Because even if you have the C-suite on board or mostly on board, well, then the next level down are the people who really are the ones getting things done and potentially putting up roadblocks to getting things done. So I think it's really important, number one, that you listen to what it is that's most important to them, and whether it's data that comes back, or a survey, or a listening project that you can do for a key stakeholder. It will be based on how well you listened and the fact that you're hitting those buttons that are hot buttons to them. So an example of one team building, I guess you could say, activity was, we had a treasury management department, right? And they're the people that really are involved in all the suite of products and services that a business could buy from a bank. So ACH, wire management, electronic banking, positive pay, which is like a security type fraud prevention for your checking and your operating accounts. So they were concerned about, so as we were not alone, as you go through mergers and acquisitions as banks, which is not an uncommon thing these days. When you bring in a new bank, there's two different ways of doing business. And so the new bank came in, one of the two acquisitions we had done in a short period of time, and they had a different way of doing things, and they had more hand-holding. And as you scale and grow, as a team, your team can't hold hands as much. You've got to create processes and systems that are more efficient. And so the concern was that this new bank was used to that. Now they're going to be, merging into our kind of way of doing things. How do you make it a customer-centric acquisition? And this was a particular concern for that stakeholder, that I was trying to build a team and work with and list the support of on my team. And he was concerned specifically about the onboarding friction. Without getting into the details, there were some technical things, there were some complicated things. And so we ended up we did an external survey about trends in the marketplace as it related to that. We did an internal survey of the employees, and then we did a survey of the customers, and got really pinpointed what part of their journey and specifically what the pain was. And they ended up, at the outcome of all that was, they ended up carving out a group of people from the contact center that were dedicated just to the onboarding of the contact management, as people were onboarding. And so they were there to help with that really high friction element. And then we surveyed again and started to see improved results. So I think that's it. I think two things is, one, if you listen, then you can check in along the way, and then gain some support by trying to serve based on the specific needs that also are in alignment with the corporate needs, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense, Mark. I absolutely love some of those ideas. There's two big things that you called out that I want to bounce right into. One of them is just this notion you said, making sure that essentially the executive view or the executive story aligns with, and I'm just going to say, for lack of a better term, your extended leadership, because you just nailed it, man. There's a big difference, and then oftentimes there's many gaps with many businesses around the executive leadership team thinking that they've done a brilliant job of telling the story and sending out the marching orders and giving the directional view for where the company's going. Yep. But you got to go a layer deeper, and you got to go to that extended leadership team. Those are typically your directors, your managers, your senior. These are the guys and gals that are going to get stuff done. They're going to be the ones that are leading the damn team. They're the people that are talking to customers every single solitary. They're definitely the part of the organization or the part of the team that gets it the best, because they got both sides that you're starting to hit on for us. They know the customer pulse, and then they know the frontline pulse. They know that they know exactly what the guys and gals are thinking that are going hand to hand with your customers every single solitary day, or your tools and your technologies you started to mention. So that's one huge thing that I love that you kind of called out early here. The other big piece too, though, is just this this consternation point, right? Like you mentioned, You give it an example of like the technology possibly providing a little bit of stickiness or consternation, but like the other thing that I love about that, Mark, is like getting customer feedback is just part of it, right? Getting customer feedback and then layering on top of employee feedback, and then almost like looking at the two things aligned together. More often than not, guys, that's going to show you the top areas that you've got to prioritize, right? Because if your customers are saying the exact same thing that your internal employees are saying, you're onto something. You've just figured out a thing that needs to get either flipped to the top of your OKR or your strategic roadmap, or you figured out the thing that's probably going to yield the highest ROI, right? If you're going to bang out a problem or a consternation point that smooths a bunch of things for your customer side and a bunch of things for your employee side, you've just found a nice little area to kind of stick into for that given quarter. So I love those ideas. Before
And Adrian,
yeah, go ahead.
Adrian, I would just add just to complement that thought about the about thinking about the data that you get back from employees and customers. I would add one more element, and that's the operational data. So in this case, it would be sort of how long it takes to onboard a client fully, and understanding what the KPIs are in that process, and then go back and measure after you've made the improvements. That helps tell the story. And also, just to add on to the ROI. So what I've learned kind of the hard way is that one of the mistakes, you didn't ask about my mistakes, but I'm going to be vulnerable here for a minute.
Let's talk about the mistakes.
It's really tempting. It's really tempting to go for the grand slam as a CX leader. And by the way, our job is very hard. So if you're doing that and you're a practitioner right now, God bless you. I have all the respect in the world and admiration for you. It's really, really hard. In some ways, it reminds me of selling books door to door, but even harder.
Yeah.
Even harder.
It's a tough space in any organization.
It is so hard. So yeah, what was I just talking about?
The mistakes
Yeah, the going for the grand slam and this ROI, because there are some huge projects that have the potential for an amazing ROI. You can't lose sight of the fact that what I like to try and think of it as what's the business value that you're gonna give back to the organization as a result of the efforts going in. So it may not always translate into dollars and cents, but there's a value statement that should come out of any work that you can do that an executive can easily grasp onto. And what I was going to say was, don't lose sight of the importance of quick wins. I was told that going in. I had some really smart Sherpas helping me, and I lost sight of it. And it's like, get the quick win, the story that wasn't 100 pound lift. It was a thing that really mattered to someone, that you could say, this was the before, this is what we changed, and this was the after. And the outcome was a success, even if it wasn't $1 million ROI. Do you know what I'm saying?
I 100% do. And I think that's incredible advice, where there's almost sometimes a tendency for customer focused business leaders, or the guys and gals that are leading CX and CS, to want to highlight and to be able to pull out and to be able to put front and center all the bad stuff, all the stuff that's broken with your product, and all the stuff that is not okay with your team, and all the shortcomings, all the things that every company in the world is struggling with. And you're right, man. Focusing on the wins of the week and the wins of the month, and for sure, man, like calling out like the positive stuff, because frankly, like a big part of CX and a big part of CS is like, man, once you know the 3 or the 4 or the 5 or the 20% of things you hear 80% of the time that people love about you, talk about that all the time, and think about how you can show new customers how they start to experience those good things. And you're right, that's a big part of it. And the last thing is this, and it's like, we all spend all of our time at work, man. I know I talk about this all the time, but like, man, constantly drowning yourself in the negative stuff, it's not going to yield the types of action or investment. This is another big piece for our younger CX and CS leaders. You want a real good way of snoozing your executive leadership team right out of the room. Keep bringing the negative stuff. Like, come on, the work is hard. Growing a business is hard. Keeping revenue coming in is hard. Talk about the good stuff. Talk about the things that are going great with the customers, going great with your CX team. Love that advice. I love that advice, Mark. Mark, let's jump into the second CX pillar of tools. I'd love to kind of hear how you sort of navigated the complexity as a CX leader of thinking about how to manage the tech stack and how to think about what tools were going to be ideal for not only your team or for the businesses that you were working at the time, but how have you kind of navigated the ever evolving world of technology as it relates to customer experience?
Hmm. Well, that's a great question, and I will tell you, I think, I've heard so much about how it may continue to change in the next 5 years, even more than it changed the last 5 years or so, with the whole advent of robotic processing, learn machine language, AI, and how accessible it's going to be. And so those partners, as a mid-size or small size organization, you may not have the infrastructure to build out yourself, but your partners will start having that, and those will be available. So I think what's important is a couple of things. Is one, get really clear about what the CX mission is, right? And then what is your plan as a CX leader or someone in the organization who's advocating for the client if you don't have a full-time person? What's the plan? What do you want to see in terms of the way your customers experience the organization? And then the mistake I think, a lot of organizations make is they have technology in search of a strategy, right? And so you want to have your strategy around what it is. So maybe it's, hey, we're going to focus on I'm making this up, but we're going to focus on our highest value client and their journey that they go through with us. And to support that, we need X. In a bank, maybe it was a loan origination system. Maybe it was more applications that connect to our CRM, which happened to be Salesforce, right? That could facilitate, better tracking and better feeding of the sales pipeline, so that we equipped our salespeople and frontline people and automated more to make their job easier, to get higher quality leads, and to get more intelligence about what, and I'm making this up again because this may not be a priority for you, but really to understand what the highest value slice of our customer base is. And that could be something based on customer lifetime value, but which percentage of our customers are bringing the most, revenue back to us, and what do we need to understand more about them? Because I think you mentioned before about focusing on the mistakes and things that aren't going right, and we need to do things like closed feedback loop, talking about technology and the use of it. We do need to have a mechanism in place. Any mature CX program will have a mechanism in place to close feedback. When they get feedback from customers, they do something about it, and they can do something short term. But also it's important to say strategically, do I understand what this slice of customers that are bringing me the top 10% or something, they're bringing us the best value back? What do they want? What are they willing to pay for that we don't currently offer them?
Yep.
It's the skybox thing. You were talking
Yep.
about the Bills a minute ago, and that the fact that it's going to snow like heck in Buffalo, and they're going to have to move the game to Detroit.
We might have 3 to 6 feet of snow Buffalo this week, guys. And yep, as Mark said, the Bills might be playing in Detroit Lions Stadium against the Brownies this week. So the joys of being in Western New York, Mark.
Yeah, so people pay for a skybox at the stadium there, and you could get a seat, I don't know, $150 for a regular seat, but they're willing to spend $20,000 for a skybox, and happy to pay that money. So what is it, are you understanding your customer base, and are you building the technology and the tech stack, as you said, that supports the strategies so you're thinking about it? This is not just because everybody else is buying it. Somebody said we need a better this or a better that, so we can be more efficient, because that's what I call just pedaling faster in the wrong direction.
I like that, man. There's a bunch of stuff that you just dropped, Mark, that I think is so important to circle back on. One piece is, you just made a comment about so many companies, they want to throw tools at problems, right? And I get it. We live in this world now where like everybody's comfortable. Most people are comfortable with technology. Everybody knows that it's an easy game changer and an easy way to optimize any of our human involvement, right? When we've got some technology-based support or some software that can kind of help ease the flow of the day-to-day. Totally get it. One thing that I think is really interesting is, I mean, all these reports suggest that the global SaaS market is literally about to just become a behemoth. It already is, right? I think in there's many reports out there that suggest just in 2021 alone, there's anywhere from 140 to 150 billion dollars of global SaaS spend annually. This number is about to get even bigger, Mark. I've seen reports that suggest that the global SaaS market is expected to reach over 700 billion by 2028. And it makes sense, because if you think about it, you look around, especially with the world right now, lot of pessimistic views about the global market, the global economy. A lot of teams are probably going to slim down a little bit, right? A lot of folks are going to be asked to tighten that belt up. How are you going to be able to get by with less people? Technology, right? Everybody's almost trained to think, oh, no worries. Well, we can get rid of 20% of the team, and now we've got all this additional budget where we can go invest in some of the technology that'll optimize for the rest of them. Maybe, right? I think like it's really easy to think that technology is going to solve all your problems. I think the real world doesn't necessarily always flow that way. But I think you're right, where the second piece is just, man, like making sure that there's somebody in the business or there's somebody on the team who's constantly thinking about what your today tech stack can do for you. What are the utilization rates within that tech stack? What are the pricing, right? Let's talk brass tacks for a second, guys. Part of our jobs as CX and CS leaders is making sure that we're running a lean budget that's actually going to be sustainable for the future, right? And I think that the last part is this, man. I think that I know at CXC, Mark, we've spent a ton of time with our clients doing like our tool stack audits and our tool stack assessments. And a lot of what we're trying to do is help them slim things down, but really more about what you made a comment about, helping to provide focus, right? Helping to understand, look, easy to understand that there's 15 tools that might be able to accomplish everything. Let's pick the 3 or 4 that our organization can get around, become masters of, understand how to utilize, understand how to leverage. And then from the CXCS leadership perspective, typically reporting becomes a bit easier. Your data aggregation becomes a little bit easier. Your ability to build stories with the data that you're seeing becomes a little bit easier. So all really awesome ideas here. And I think, frankly, guys, my personal thought is I think that the second pillar of tools is going to become one of the biggest areas that future CX and CS leaders are really going to be tasked with understanding for their business and being able to report back to their executive leadership team and their technology team what's working and what's not working. And I think that you're seeing some of the best companies in the world, they're already doing that. I think that there's a lot of companies that have to catch up with it. And then alignment with your CX, your CS, and your product. You're going to see that becoming more and more and more of a norm. And you're going to see the companies that accelerate ahead into the future really investing in that. Mark, I'd love to jump into this third CX pillar process. And we just started to kind of hit on it, but over your journey, man, I'd love to understand some of the things that worked really well for you with a couple of things. Number one, just building playbooks for your team, thinking about what standard operating procedures need to look like, thinking about how you collect and aggregate FAQs and knowledge base. I'd love for you to spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the things you've learned along your journey around how a CX and a CS leader can think about process and process management.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier, team sport, I'm not going to go backwards, but I'm going to tie it to this process piece, which is you really do need people, you really need to do more. It needs to be more than the CX department or CX person that is managing a portfolio of projects through the system, right? You need to get together some sort of governance group that is prioritizing the things that get spun up, out of the data you collect from X data, experience data that you collect from operational data, data that comes from financial data, that you say, okay, we need to make a change here in the way that the customers are experiencing us. So that needs to be, in my opinion, a group. And we had what we call the Client Experience Leadership Council. And it was a bunch of key stakeholders that were aware of the things that kept coming up based on data, and made data-driven decisions, but not in a vacuum, because it doesn't work that way. So you can try, but ultimately you need support, and you need employee engagement. So at that top level, I think we're talking about process now. That's one thing that needs to be in place in a mature CX program, is you've got the governance in place. And then in terms of change, right? So how are you understanding the journeys that your customers are going through? And at any given point, you should really document your top 2 or 3 customer journeys, and understand the process that your customers are going through. And a lot of organizations now, I know ours was getting a formalized business process improvement team together, Well, the process improvement, often works with the PMO, the project management office. The process improvement that happens should be informed by the customer journeys, not the other way around, right? So what are your top journeys? What are the problems your customers, what are the goals your customers have? What are the needs that they have? And what do we as an what's in alignment with our corporate goals that we need to attack first? And that's where the governance team, and then you've got journey maps in place. And then if you're an organization that's mature, you've got people that can help with experience design to design the new experience and ways that you're again going to then measure and test, and circle that feedback to say, hey, customers, did we do it for you? What else needs to get done? So another thing, you talk about the employee experience. One of the things we hit hard was employee experience, and that is what I call turning all the light bulbs on in the organization. They turn on one at a time, but once they're turned on, they don't turn off. So sometimes it's hard to turn on, but really have people kind of believe in, maybe they're not evangelizing, but they're believing in what you're doing from a CX standpoint. And that involved, from the day they got there, your orientation had a CX component. And we share with them the process that we went through to make a change in the customer's experience. It included an Experience Champions program, where people could volunteer, raise their hand and say, I would like to learn more about this. I'm going to go, get a certificate at the end of 8 months or 10 months, and you'll teach me the basics. And now we've got people, ready and poised to move up in the organization to maybe be on that governance council. So it's a whole strategy and infrastructure built in, embedded into the culture that takes time, but it's a strategic look at how change gets made. That's my view of it. I don't know what you think.
No, Mark, I think that's awesome, man. I think like this idea of the council. I know at CXC, a big part of what we're doing is helping clients build essentially voice of customer task force. And it's the same thing that you said to council, but there's something that I want to jump on that I love about what you're laying out here for us, which is, and you and I chatted about this on your podcast recently, but guys, this is one of the easiest ways that you can start to take some of your CX efforts and immediately start to bolster some of your EX efforts, right? Like the minute you start to get smart, turned on, light bulbs on type of people in your business who care about this stuff, who've got great ideas, plus then you start to do the variation of subject matter expertise. You got the marketing person, the salesperson, the operative person, the financial person, the DevOps person working together. Number one, you're making your team way smarter, way more well-rounded. People are learning from each other. You're also, again, when I'm always talking about the bridge building, Mark, on the show, but you're building bridges. You're literally laying plumbing, you're laying electrical, you're building bridges, you're giving people an opportunity to expand their tribal knowledge or to share their tribal knowledge. The other thing too is that I want to go back to the so happy you brought up the journey mapping part. I am 100% with you, man, where like journey maps aren't just these frou-frou colorful things that people want done and they're very expensive and they take many months. They can be, but they're blueprints. They're blueprints for your business. They're blueprints for your team, your tools, your processes, and your feedback. So they literally start to lay out all these different opportunities around how to think about your playbooks, how to think about your learning management, how to think about what types of assets, training, coaching, and ongoing support that your employees need to be able to do their jobs exceptionally well. And then the last thing is just what you made me think about, man, is all of that is great and all that's well and good, but companies change every single solitary week, every single day, every single month. So if you're not doing controlling and monitoring, to kind of borrow from our Six Sigma friends, thinking about some of that, you got to be doing controlling and monitoring. I know that whether it's once a month or once a quarter, someone in the business or someone on your council or your voice of customer task force has got to be sharing the updates, the changes, the decisions that need to be made organizationally, right? Like, so this is some of the gold that you can be having this council or this voice of customer task force put in front and center on a monthly basis for your entire, not just your leadership team and your extended leadership team, but for your whole business to be thinking about. And I think the last thing, I almost view this like any type of fanship, right? Like for people to become fans or for people to be able to buy into this stuff, they got to know about it. They got to be aware of it to even start to formulate their own ideas around it. And then there's got to be some involvement. So I love that you kind of talked about with some of your teams just polling and getting feedback and then democratizing the feedback, showing the results to the group so that people can kind of see, hey guys, look, on 100 employees, This is what y'all thought. 100 customers. This is what they all thought. Let's figure out where the meat and the potatoes are, and let's start digging into the high ROI areas that we can invest in. So I love those ideas, Mark. Mark, I'd love to jump into the fourth and the final CX pillar of feedback. And we just kind of started to tee that up perfectly. So good segue. But what are some of the things that you've really been the most blown away by in your own career? And let's break this into two parts. I'd love for you to start with like some of the things that have just been exceptional or really, really eye-opening on the customer feedback side. And then I want you to finish the question with talking about the same thing with your teams and the employee feedback side. Spend a few minutes kind of talking about how you've thought about feedback and tackled feedback throughout your career.
Yeah, so like many other maturing CX organizations, we got event Voice of the Customer platform. We used one of the large VOC companies. I'll just leave the name off because we ended up switching at the end to another. And essentially they have very similar offerings is what I found. And then the service does matter. So we set that up in place, and that worked pretty well for our retail customers. We had large numbers, and we had a better than average response rate. We were able to get some good feedback, start a closed feedback loop system where we would respond and distribute to the different, in our cases, it was mostly branches. It was a bank, and get some immediate response back to our customers. Then develop the trend reporting that allowed us to see what was changing over time and what maybe some of our weak spots. And this was some of the data that drove our decisions on what we needed to change. And when we got to the point we get agile, so we get a question from a stakeholder that said, "Hey, I'm thinking about adding this product line. Can you go work with marketing, do some research on our customer base? Tell me how that particular slice of customers feels about their experience with us. What have we heard about in terms of complaints or needs?" And then bring all that together, go back to the stakeholder, and then introduce a new product line. So that's one way to use feedback. Another way is we were in the middle of digital transformation, as I'm sure a lot of organizations inside of financial services or outside, saying all the things that we've done manually, all the things we've done with Excel spreadsheets in the past, we need to automate those things. We need to have things, predictive analytics and things working in our favor. And so how do you then ask the customers, what do they care most about? We ended up saying, the surveys aren't going to work for our business customers. We just don't get enough feedback, and we don't know who to ask right within the organization. We have a contact, but may not be the right contact. So we developed 3 cohorts, and this is just an idea, but 3 cohorts of 12 customers, business clients, in each one, and met with them virtually once a quarter, asked if they would commit to 2 years. And you would be surprised, because we're asking them to help us shape probably the most important thing. There were other things as well, because we were still in the middle of the pandemic. We were asking about that, but and we're asking about something called PPP, which is the payroll protection program that the government set up for businesses. But the biggest thing was digital transformation. That team that was about to make a whole bunch of changes, not the whole tech stack, not just one core switch out, but a bunch of things, is what do the customers think about it? And the customers in this case largely said, there are certain basic things you need to do a better job at, but don't take away the people part of it, because that's what distinguishes you from other banks, like the big banks, and we don't have to name names, that I can get on the phone and I can call you, or I can call even an executive if I want to get an answer about something. You take that away and we'll leave you. And that's me generalizing, but that doesn't show up in a regular survey. So the whether you can do an IDI, which is an in-depth interview, or a focus group roundtable, but if you can put something together that has sort of a longitudinal thing, and really have conversations with the right customers, whatever that is for your organization, and get into their, and not just one, but more than one, and so it's not anecdotal, some gold in those hills there.
I love that, man. I think you're spot on. It's just keeping that regular pulse. Plus, customers, the right types, to your point, the right types of customers, and some of the customers that are going to be imperative to your company's future. so many of them are willing to take the time to give you some feedback or to give you
Yeah.
some candid ideas or to tell you about the stuff that they think you're doing a brilliant job with, but to also say, hey man, Mark, there's like 3 things that this competitive bank's doing over here that y'all might want to take a look at that, because that should be on someone's R&D play, right? Or somebody should be thinking about the research and the development that could yield your future offering. So all fantastic ideas there. I love it. Mark, before we wrap up today's show, man, I want to give you the opportunity. Where can people find out, number one, how to get in touch with you and how to learn more about the things that you guys are doing in EmpoweredCX? And then please make sure that you're dropping where people can listen to your show, Delighted Customers Podcast, so that people know where they can find all the awesome content and discussions and dialogue that you're having with your incredible community of customer-focused business leaders.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Adrian. You mentioned earlier at the top the Delighted Customers Podcast, and one of my favorite guests was Adrian. By the time you hear this, that episode will be available, and like the other episodes are available on all the major distribution, Apple, Spotify, etc. So that's Delighted Customers. I am the company's EmpoweredCX, and EmpoweredCX is the website.com. And also I am going to be, by the time this airs, I'll have a free assessment for call it an experience maturity assessment, to get a kind of a starting place for where you might line up as an organization compared to some of the best and what they have in common in terms of maturing their search. So you just stay in touch, reach me through any of those 2 avenues, and love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining the CXChronicles podcast. It's been our absolute pleasure having you on the show, sir.
Thanks, Adrian. Awesome to be here.